Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to News in Focus. My name is Faraz Batal. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, TSTV channel 347. So many of you, of course, woke up this morning and it was as cold as you could get. That's because that very same front has brought snow, freezing temperatures, and dangerous conditions to several parts of the country. Disaster management authorities have warned the weather, may turn deadly if communities are not adequately prepared. In the Eastern Cape, heavy snowfall and deadly collisions forced the closure of the N10 between Cookhouse and Craddock and the N2 outside of East London. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome forecaster and meteorologist at the South African Weather Service, Lehlohonolo Thobela. Lehlohonolo, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Brother, thanks for having me. It's a beautiful day. It's cold, but it's another day.
I think you definitely dressed for the occasion, but I think we can say,
Yeah.
gratefully, we've got the aircon here in studio keeping us warm. Lehlohonolo, is it as simple as saying this is just typical winter conditions?
It is typical winter conditions, especially if you have a cold front as well as a cut-off low weather system that pushes into the central interior. So, characteristics of a cut-off low are known to bring about dropping temperatures, dropping freezing levels, as well as bringing about heavy rains that might result in localized flooding. And if it is extreme, like what we've seen now, it will result in snow. So, what happened is that several cold fronts made landfall in the Western Cape, and they moved further east in the country, as well as impacting the Eastern Cape and the southern parts of KwaZulu-Natal. As you opened there with the weather update and what has happened, you did mention the N2. It's around Kokstad where the road closures are as we speak due to a disruptive snow. We issued a yellow orange level 6 warning for disruptive snow, as well as orange level 9 for disruptive rain in the eastern parts of the Eastern Cape, which might result in localized flooding. And it's not only limited to just localized flooding, but it's causing disruptions in areas around Umtata, as we've seen flooding conditions covering the community's houses, and people are actually fighting for their lives and we've seen a couple of videos of people on top of trees trying to get help due to these flooded areas. I mean, waters are quite enormous in those areas. Water depths reaching heights closer to the height of a house, and that's what we've seen in the observations and the social media. So it's quite drastic, but at the same time, it is devastating to hear that the weather warnings are actually materializing in those areas.
Yeah, I want to touch on the Eastern Cape, Lehlohonolo, because when you
Yeah.
see those images and you look at the snow, is that unprecedented by any chance? Or is that something that we should have potentially expected, given where the Eastern Cape is? And of course, we just have to look to our neighbor, which is none other than Lesotho.
Yeah, I mean, for us to issue a warning is something that we expected to happen. I mean, we started a media release as early as Friday last week into the weekend, expecting these adverse weather conditions from Monday. A drop in temperatures was expected in the eastern half into the central interior, covering the eastern parts of the Eastern Cape to the southern parts of KwaZulu-Natal. But it doesn't help that population is growing. But with the population growing, we have a lot of people settling in areas that they shouldn't settle in, informal settlements, formal settlements, and a lot of people are developing within floodplains. So within those areas and regions, as we're sending out weather warnings, it is to make sure that people are proactive with the warnings instead of being reactive. Unfortunately, we would see people who are being reactive as they don't listen to probably some media outlets where they speak about the adverse weather conditions until they happen. As mentioned, yes, we were expecting heavy rains as well as cold conditions and a possibility of disruptive snow. So nothing of this is happening, and it's out of the ordinary for us, as we've also tried to prepare the public by sending out weather warnings prior to it happening. I mean, it's been a few days. I mean, this media release covered everything from Friday last week.
Yeah, I think
Excuse me.
that's I think the important part of it. I mean, obviously the South African Weather Service, as the official weather provider for the country, of course, goes ahead and gives those warnings, especially to emergency services who, of course, need it at that time.
Yeah.
And just on the Eastern Cape, let's move to KwaZulu-Natal. They themselves, of course, are heavy snowfall, not a lot of it, of course, heading into eThekwini, but many of the southern parts of the province, they themselves also bordering close to Lesotho, and some of them, of
Yeah.
course, very close to the Drakensberg Mountains.
Yeah, these are conditions you expect, especially the high-lying areas of the Eastern Cape into Drakensberg Mountains, as you've mentioned. There is a Drakensberg, I mean, escarpments that lead to Lesotho and the extreme southwestern parts of KwaZulu-Natal. In winter, they usually get snow, but I think with what's happening now, because it was about to get destructive, that's why we sent out warnings of disruptive snow over the high-lying areas, especially around the national roads where people are known to commute within. So that's why we made sure that we send a warning that if you can postpone your trip, rather do that than to try your luck into these icy roads.
Lehlohonolo, I want to come here to Gauteng. Now, I had people telling
Yeah.
me, and obviously you take it with a pinch of salt, a lot of them saying, we're going to potentially get snow that's going to be falling from Monday morning. I, of course, follow the South African Weather Service media statements, and there was none of that, but there was, of course, a little bit of rain. We did have close to below
Yeah.
zero temperatures early this morning.
Yes.
Gauteng not getting snow. What happened there? Were we
Yeah.
supposed to, given just how low these temperatures were?
You know what? As early as last week, about Wednesday into Thursday, that's when weather forecasts and models were suggesting that they might have snow over the southern parts and the central interior of Gauteng. But because we monitor the weather every day in the South African Weather Service, we did notice that the freezing level we're not going to drop as low as it is supposed to for snow to occur over the central and the southern parts of Gauteng. However, we're expecting sleet, especially in the early hours of the morning, which is just free frozen precipitation that was expected to fall in the overnight into areas in the early morning, early hours over the southern parts of Gauteng, just around Vereeniging, into parts, extremely southern parts of the Soweto and those areas. But none of that happened because the freezing level didn't drop as low as what it should for snow to occur over the southern parts of Gauteng. However, it was quite a very, very low likelihood. We did mention it in the media release that there is a very low likelihood of snow happening in Gauteng. However, we did see some snow in the southern parts of the Free State into the extreme eastern parts of the Free State province, especially areas around Vicksburg and just south of Vicksburg and areas just around Alwale North. So we were expecting snow in the high-lying areas of the Eastern Cape, the southern parts of Free State and the eastern parts of the Free State, as well as the southern parts of KwaZulu-Natal, not so much in Gauteng. Cold conditions were expected, but they would have happened and resulted in sleet, especially over the extreme southern parts of Gauteng. But for now, we're not expecting any snow unless we have another weather system that would bring in high chances of freezing levels dropping to conditions that might result in snow in Gauteng.
Lehlohonolo, one final question. I've seen the forecast for the rest of this week. It seems to be getting
Yeah.
warm. It's going to border around close to 20, of course, if you're in the northern part of Gauteng. But it should warm up, shouldn't it, given how the week is shaping up?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the last bit of the severe weather warnings in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal are up until tonight. For tomorrow, it's just damaging winds that are expected in the interior of KwaZulu-Natal into the eastern parts of the Eastern Cape, as well as the damaging winds and waves along the east coast, which might result in navigation at sea to be difficult. But from Thursday into the afternoons of Friday, we're going to start seeing a gradual change in the temperatures getting to warm up, especially over Gauteng and Mpumalanga, as well as the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal, as well as touching parts in the eastern parts of the northwest. So yes, we're going to start to seeing a gradual change into an improvement to the weather conditions that everyone can be happy about into the weekend.
Lehlohonolo, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for a beautiful interview, brother. Have a blessed one.
Absolute pleasure. That's Lehlohonolo Thobela, South African Weather Service forecaster and meteorologist. After the break, someone who's not going to be feeling cold is President Cyril Ramaphosa, because he's heading to Canada for the G7 Leaders Summit. I'm going to be speaking to Dr. Oscar van Heerden after the break.